Let's check out another game with this pawn structure. So we can see, again, almost a symmetrical position. No, not quite, but symmetrical pawns in the middle. And again, we have a pretty good knight against a bishop that really isn't so good because it's on the same colour as the central pawn. White has done very well to manoeuvre the knight into the middle of the board. An excellent square where, you know, it's looking at all these squares. Now, I should say this is Botvinnik against Petrosian from their World Championship match in 1963. So this is a heavyweight struggle again. Petrosian has blocked off these squares, in particular the c5 square, very important, by putting the pawns on black squares. Good stuff. But these squares are more problematic. I like the way that Botvinnik has advanced his pawns on the king's side, and that rather blocks out the bishop. So White is looking to use these weakened dark squares, and there's no dark squared bishop to cover the squares. So Petrosian plays f6. This is a good move. So we've seen how this pawn covers e5 and g5, and the bishop can cover the light squares. So there's a kind of barrier that's formed here. Now White would like to use this outpost, and he takes steps to try and do that with h4. Excellent move. If White doesn't try and break through like this, I don't think he's really going to get anywhere. Petrosian exchanges pieces. He's under pressure, so that's logical. And bishop takes. If queen takes, then straight away White could go for g5 because the queen is no longer covering the g5 square. So bishop takes, but the problem is that allows White to occupy the open file, and as we'll see, that's rather important. So bishop f7 and now g5. Good move. So Botvinnik is looking to knock out the f6 pawn, and in that way he'll be able to use the e5 square for his pieces, and that could be decisive because the bishop can't touch that at all. So bishop e6. Okay, Petrosian looking to at least get a decent square for his bishop. Knight f4, and the bishop's got to go back. This is Botvinnik testing Petrosian. So for example, if bishop f5, then this is very strong indeed. And now queen f5, threatening the d5 pawn. And when the rook comes across, simply rook e2. And White dominates the open file, and this should be a winning position. It's very difficult for Black to do anything at all here. Okay, so bishop f7, and the knight hop back again, because on f4 its possibilities are all covered. So it came back to d3 and bishop e6. So, okay, they've repeated the position. They're just testing each other. So, only way for White to make progress is to knock out the f6 pawn. And now queen g5. Yes, there's a problem for Black. He can't play queen takes d4 because knight e5 is a nasty discovered attack. Whoops, there we go. But maybe instead of exchanging, he should have played king g7 to try and bring his king to a better position. Petrosian exchanged, and actually this is now very, very good for White. Botvinnik has achieved exactly what he wanted, namely the weakening of the e5 square, but not just that. Black's king is really cramped. This pawn on g5 does a great job of controlling these two pawns, and it also means that these squares are also very weak. It's very nice that the pawn stands on f3 as well, because that means it's more difficult for the bishop to get in on these squares. So that's doing a good job. And now white just needs to break through, but it should be possible. So it's not just the knight that looks good on those dark squares. If the king can come in as well, things are looking really seriously bad for black. Now, this is quite a long end game. They reached a rook and pawn ending, which Botvinnik finally managed to win. But it's been suggested here that the best move would have been knight e5. Let's take a look at what might happen. So rook c3, and now to take, and rook b2. This is a way of bringing the white rook into the attack, actually. It's the king that's the problem here. This bishop has nothing to do. It has no targets at all. It truly is a very bad bishop, because yeah, I mean, if it could come the other side of the pawn chain and maybe settle on e4, supposing the pawn were on f4, then that might be a different story. You might be able to get some counterplay. But here, with the pawn on f3, very cleverly left there, this is very good for white. Okay, even with this reduced material, black is in huge trouble. So now it's just about attacking black's king. Let's take a look at this. I think it's very, very interesting to see how it works. Okay, so first of all, the black king is trapped on the back rank. It would be lovely if we could play knight here to f6, but of course it would be exchanged off. We don't want that. So it comes into f7, and it can come to h6. Now this is a big problem. If, for example, well, let's say rook d2, then knight check, and if the king goes in the corner, then rook g8 is actually checkmate. Very nice illustration of the pawns porting the knight and controlling f6. These dark squares are so weak, and they cannot be covered by that bishop. So therefore the king escapes. But even so, white gets a fantastic attack. Obviously, the threat to the h-pawn is also a threat, probably just to exchange the bishop and come in with the king. I mean, that's possible in this position, but I think it's even better to keep that knight on the board. Just have a look at this. This is really typical. Those dark squares are so weak. You know, you can give up this pawn and now come in with the king. The threat is to play, well, let me show you the threat. So if d4, then that's mate again. And if black tries to stop that, bishop c8, then, well, probably many ways to win. But let's have a look at this. Oh, white was threatening rook h8 and taking the bishop. Now here, and f4. Yeah, what I would like to do with white is play rook g7 to g8 and checkmate. This king is fantastic. I love this here. It's beautiful. But then comes rook f4 and black covers. So that's why white is playing f4 first. And here, if we have a look at this, some nice moves here. So that's threatening mate. King comes across, and now f5. And this is the end. Takes here, and that really is going to be checkmate, because the rook can no longer come across to cover. It's blocked by the bishop. But nice mating attack, but so typical when these dark squares are weakened, and that bishop can do absolutely nothing against it. So if I can just recap. The Sadie Fisher game, the Fisher ending, Fisher won with the good knight against bad bishop. Yeah, good winning chances there, though objectively it might be a draw. But when you have the major pieces on the board, as here, then I think this really does start to look like a really bad piece. And this idea of coming in on the dark squares, which actually Fisher tried to carry out with colours reversed, by knocking out Sadie's pawn on f3. Well, Botvinnik is actually doing exactly the same job here, but he's knocking out the pawn on f6, and he did that beautifully with h4, and later on he got in g5. Although Petrosian might have defended better, it is very, very difficult to hold this kind of position.